Good morning, Suzuki Science. This is week 3 of our online distance learning. Last week we focused on microevolution, which was clearly a part of the evolution unit. This week we're focusing on speciation. You did quite a few things last week that I do want to talk about and give you some feedback and just to have a general discussion. Well, I don't know if it's really a discussion with me talking to a camera, but you know what I'm talking about. So we will talk about that later in this week. Today I'm focusing on delivering your lesson, and this lesson has a lot of information, a lot of moving parts, so let's focus on the lesson and then we'll do the feedback a little bit later this week. So our topic this week is speciation, and that is how do new organisms come into being. So we talked and focused on microevolution, so that was the change in allele frequencies over a short period of time. And now speciation is the development of a brand new species, or we might call it macroevolution. Okay, so I like to start the class with an engage, and if we were in class right now in the classroom, then we would all be sitting at our desks, and I'd have a bunch of these plants or plant parts on your desk. So let's take a look and see if we recognize what these are. This first one here. So go ahead and say it out loud. You know, someone who's walking by your room door wondering who you're speaking to, and you'll be like, I'm speaking to the camera. You recognize this, I assume. You probably haven't seen a broccoli plant in that form, but if you were in the field, it would look like this. So that's the flower, and there are the leaves growing in the ground. So that's our broccoli. There's something similar about these plants. So let's grab another one that's clearly very similar to broccoli. You might recognize that one. That is cauliflower. Good. And take a look at this one here. We got Brussels sprouts and kohlrabi. You'll notice the two of them look very similar. A part of them, Brussels sprouts are quite tiny. The kohlrabi is actually quite large. See two different colors there. Okay. How about this one here? Recognize that one? In class, most students seem to recognize this one. It's one of the most recognizable. I guess a lot of you eat green good stuff. It's kale. Over here, do you recognize this one? It's not a full shot. I should have done a full picture of it, but I just really like that picture. It's cabbage. And then some other weird ones. This was more of an East Asian diet, broccolini. Kind of a mix between kale and broccoli. So what's interesting about all these is that they all originated from a single plant. So this plant that we're looking at here is the wild mustard. And the wild mustard is a plant that has been grown for hundreds of years. And what the ancient farmers did is they said, you know what, we really want a leafy vegetable. And another farmer said, I really want, focus on the flower. Another one, I want to focus on the stem. So they looked at particular traits that seemed to be prevalent in a particular plant, and they took two plants that had really good stems, and they interbred them, and they ended up with plants that had bigger stems that had traits that they liked. So this idea, where you artificially select for particular genes that produce a phenotype that we want as a human, that makes us happy because we eat it or we train it or we cuddle it or whatever it is, that is known as artificial selection. Okay, so the wild mustard is been artificially selected into all those things I just showed you a moment ago. Okay, and they continue to do that to this day. There's still many things that are being artificially selected, including within the wild mustard family. Other more classic examples of artificial selection include the dog, the wolf, the ancient gray wolf. The gray wolf, it's been proposed that there was a number of different times where an ancient gray wolf ancestor was domesticated and artificially selected for particular traits. Smell for hunting, particular long legs for speed, particular looks for, people like their poodles and there's a number of different traits that you can artificially select for in the wolf that produces the modern dogs that we see today. So you'll see a number of links that I have. Now let me explain how this lesson, the whole lesson works. So I'm giving you a video lesson, and it's like I'm standing in front of the class talking to you. But what you should have also opened at the same time is the Google Sheet. And the Google Sheet, I'll just pull it over here. Looks like this, right? And you'll see that I've given you the minimum, which is supposed to be like supposedly the 3 hours. And then there's a green and yellow, which gives you more information, will fill in the gaps. If all you do is the minimum, then in grade 11, in grade 12 biology, and in university, when you do this concept, you'll have huge gaps, right? The minimum is like the bare bones, what the big idea concept is. Green and yellow gives you a chance to practice and get a better understanding. And of course, if you want to do a complete understanding, green, yellow, and pink. So as you go through here, whenever you see green, that's the minimum. I put up a Google Doc so that each of you have your own document and you can answer the questions within the Google Classroom. The yellow is typically clicking on links or following simulations or watching a video or something, and then once you watch that, then you can answer the question and bring it together. I encourage you to work with another person. Just have that person online with you at the same time, and you can be sharing answers back and forth. I'd encourage you to do that. Make sure that you understand the answers if you are working with a person. You're all handing in your own document, however. So yeah, you work your way through this document, and what will happen on the PowerPoint? On the PowerPoint, I'm going to have sheets, a particular slide that will say worksheet, and that worksheet will tell you, oh, okay, I need to go back to the Google Sheet. There's a reference from the previous 1 slide or previous 6 slides that I can bring together conceptually on the worksheet. So that's how I've tried to tie this together to make it a little bit easier for you to get the learning without me being in front of the class with you. So any links I talk about in here as well, they'll also be in the Google Sheet. So you'll see a blue link, click on it, and you can watch it as opposed to watching a clip that I might happen to show here. All right, so the dog. So watch some of the video links I have up there, understand where the domesticated dog came from. There's some movies out there that kind of explore the concept as well. Corn. There's a lot of people who say, I will not eat GMO. Genetically modified organisms is the devil, or something like that. And the truth is, and I think there's some very good scientists out there that will explain this to you. I put a link in the Google Doc, that pretty much everything that you eat in our supermarket today, even the things that you get from the farmer's field, if you are going completely organic or something like that, is genetically modified. Look at the corn. Corn is a classic example. Your original corn is basically a grass with some big kernels. And some ancient farmers recognized that these kernels had a lot of nutrition. So they started selecting for traits where the kernels were bigger and juicier and sweeter and whatnot. And over hundreds of years, we ended up going from the ancestral wild corn, which you would not recognize, to the modern corn that we see today. And in addition to eating our corn, we recognize we can get oil from corn. So we've also selected for corn that produces more oil. And when you do that, over several generations, you can increase the corn oil percentage from a 4% yield to a 20% yield, which is really significant. So artificial selection is something that we do. On your Google Sheet, you'll see a table that asks you to compare natural versus artificial selection. On my video lesson, you'll see I've given you a table that I've taken from a site. I've given you a link. I've given you another link to the 2-minute classroom that talks through the main differences between natural and artificial selection. So by going through those, you'll be able to complete this worksheet. So that's how that works back and forth. Use the worksheet as you're following along the lesson, pause when you need to, answer the questions, and then at the end of 3, 5, 6, whatever number of hours you want to put into this, you'll have a document that will give you all the interesting and hopefully important stuff you need to know for this unit, for this section of the unit. So now I want to play a few little clips. And one of the things that we have that's an issue with us is when we look at evolution, people look at evolution like, well, how did that come up to be? If you're telling me that things are naturally selected for, okay, I can understand size, something getting bigger or something getting black or dark, but how do you get to the complex behaviors? How do you get to the complex structures, the complex physiological adaptations? How does evolution explain that? So I'm going to throw some things your way, and let's see if you can tell me how evolution explains it. So here's the first one. This one is the lyrebird. Now, I don't need to show all these. There's links to them. I encourage you to take a look at the links and open them up. So how did that complex sound come to be? What is the purpose? Here is a dance of crested grebes. Right, so before they mate, they do a very specific series of complex behaviors. We call it the crested grebe courtship dance. Antlers on a deer. What is the purpose of the antlers on a deer? That's a lot of energy to spend on these antlers. Some deer regrow antlers. Some deer have the same antlers that get bigger and bigger. That's a lot of weight and mass to carry on your head. And what is the purpose? Well, how does that naturally allow this animal to be more successful than another animal that doesn't have antlers, for example? Talking about courtship dances, you guys are often familiar with birds doing their courtship dance. How about this one? Spiders. So again, I encourage you to watch the videos on your own, because I'm only showing clips because I don't want this thing here to be an hour and a half long, but you're welcome to click on the links in the document to see the full video of the peacock spiders. So how to explain the peacock's tail, the blackbird's song, the antlers on a deer, some lions having a big giant mane and then the female lioness having not, the crested grebes. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense when you start looking at natural selection as your explanation. So, on the worksheet, before you move on, I'm asking you to propose a reason why evolution has, allowed these things to occur, right? So, you are going to see the answer. We're going to talk about it, but before you get there, just so that it's more meaningful, propose an answer. And as you're doing that, I'm going to pull up this eye video here. So this is something that you'll see on the worksheet. And on the worksheet, I'm asking that you look at the eye. The eye is a really complex structure. How does natural selection show an eye developing? When you think about all the things that an eye does, if I could zoom in on my eye, you could see this various structures. We talked about it in grade 10, and we saw that there was the pupil and the iris and the photoreceptors and the rods and the cones and so many other things going on that allow you to interact with the world. So how to explain the eye through natural selection? So if you watch this clip here, it's 4.5 minutes long from TED Ed. TED has excellent lessons, and they go through an explanation of how the eye evolved. Right? Once you finish that clip, click on the Think, and there's a series of 5 multiple choice questions that just allow you to demonstrate that you did watch the video and took something away from it. And then in the dig deeper, it gives you some other links in case you're interested. The discuss question is one of the pink questions I put on our worksheet. So, was Darwin right to say that evolution of the human eye appears absurd in the highest possible degree? I don't know, Darwin said that. We know who Darwin is. So, you're working through the worksheet, and you've answered those questions, and then you can move on. The answer is sexual selection. Sexual selection. So when Darwin was focusing on natural selection, he was looking at traits that allowed an organism to be more successful than another organism in that particular environment. The environment was doing something that was pressuring the animal, plant, bacteria, fungus, protist, whatever, to be better. Sexual selection is a little bit different. It still falls the realm of evolution, but it brings in an explanation as to why you see certain things that don't seem to make a lot of sense. And that is that when you look at a particular species, that certain individuals have a trait that demonstrates their vigor, that demonstrates that they are going to be more successful than other members of their population. When we start looking at sexual selection, we have both intraspecific within the same sex and interspecific between male and female. Okay, so in this particular slide, you'll see two videos. One is our bowerbird. Excuse me, please. Okay, edit that sneeze out. All right. So one is the bowerbird. I just want to show this clip here because it's super short.
Let me give you some advice.
Edit this part out as well.
The process of doing your second.
Right. So I encourage you to watch the whole thing. But the bowerbird is a remarkable bird that builds an elaborate nest and has a pretty interesting courtship ritual in order to attract the female. Remember, the male is the one with all the color, does all the work here, trying to attract the female's attention. So the fact that we're going from male to female, that's kind of interspecific competition here. Look at this. Right. So I encourage you to take a look at these videos. They give you some videos on the idea of what sexual selection is. They do a very good job of explaining it. And you'll see the worksheet has some questions related to the movie. So intersexual is where the male and the male competes for the female's attention. And intrasexual, within the same sex, is where the males compete with each other. So you'll see bighorn sheep, you mentioned this, Mac, banging heads in order to prove that they're the strongest, most virile, and has the greatest vigor, and then they'll get the opportunity to reproduce and pass on their offspring. Okay, so that's sexual selection. So sexual selection explains a lot of the things that we see when we look at evolution. Why things don't necessarily meet the natural selection that you've learned about, it probably falls into the sexual selection category. When we look at different members of the same population, males and females, sometimes you'll notice that the males are very, very colorful and the females are a little bit more drab, that the males might be larger or smaller depending on the situation. And so when you see a big difference between the male and the female, we call that sexual dimorphism. In the praying mantis, you may know that, and some species of spiders and other arthropods, the female is often quite large, and after the female fertilizes the female often makes her first act after that to be eating the male, and she instantly gets energy. In terms of the male, it doesn't seem to be the best strategy, but it does. There's this concept known as a selfish gene, and you might be forced to read it in university, and if you get an opportunity to do casual scientific reading, it's a good book to read. And the premise is that we're not important. It's not the organism that's important, it's the gene. The gene is all about putting itself in a perfect position so that more of itself can be procreated. So if that involves the sacrifice of the larger organism, as long as the genes are spread through the eggs and sperm, then the gene is happy, the selfish gene. But biological species definition is something that you have seen already. So there's a straight definition on the screen there for you. The problem with the biological species definition is that we do have some organisms that we have never seen. We talked about this before. We have never seen dinosaurs, so we can't watch them interbreed. Bacteria reproduce asexually. So when I look at Streptococcus versus Lactobacillus, I mean, they don't need another Lactobacillus in order to produce more lactobacilli. So this definition even though it's effective for our needs here, is not the only definition for species. And as a matter of fact, at the bottom of this page, you'll see that I've given you a different species concept definition. There are more, there's probably 10, if not more, different species definitions. But we're using the classic biological species definition you see here on the page. Now, the reason why I bring this back up is because we're looking at speciation. We're looking at how a brand new species occurs. So if you want to know how a brand new species occurs, you need to know what a species is. For speciation as a straight definition, speciation occurs when a brand new species develops. So when you have one population that separates into a larger population, let me pull up this white space document here and add a new page so you can kind of diagram this out. So here I have one population. Let's go black. So here's my population. Okay, that's my circle. And so this is a population, so one species. But let's say something happens, some kind of event, where this population kind of, one of them goes into the forest, and one of them goes into the grass. And there, there's lots of back and forth. They're going back and forth. There's some going this way, and some going this way. But if that population were to become unique to the grassland or unique to the forest, and then there was no longer any interchange between these two populations, let's say that didn't happen, given enough time, this might become a brand new species, and this might become a brand new species. Okay. So that's what speciation is about. All right. So as you go through my document, you'll see a bunch of links that you can look at that will show you examples and simulations of speciation. I encourage you to work through that. I'll give you a better understanding. So the question is, how does a speciation event actually occur? So there's two major schools of thought. There's actually several more, but we're focusing on two for grade 11 biology. Allo, allo means other. Patrick is, kind of fatherland. So allopatric speciation is kind of what I diagrammed for you. It's where you have a single population and the population splits, like I showed you a moment ago, into two different environments, or let's say a big giant river comes up and separates them. Anything that separates a population causes this population to be in one spot and this population to be in a different spot, and the two genes pools are no longer intermixed. And then let's say you remove that obstacle, a big giant river formed, but now the river is gone, it's dried up. Or, the grassland forest, the transition zone becomes more mixed. When the populations come back together, they no longer mix. And when that occurs, speciation has occurred. This is allopatric speciation. So you can see it in this diagram, and you'll see it in some of the worksheets as well as the simulations. Here's another example. Single population of beetles that become separate by a river. One side of the river, I guess, is more green than the other one. The other side of the river is more brown. And then you end up with brand new populations. So it's feasible. Grand Canyon. So here's the Grand Canyon. It's separated by the Colorado River. The Colorado River, over hundreds of thousands of millions of years, has caused the land here to be separated from north and south. And on one side, you had one population of squirrels, and the other side, you have another population of squirrels. If you look at them, they look different from our squirrels. But the two of them look quite similar, except for the coloration. And there are many opportunities for animals on the north side and west side, south side, to intermix. But these are brand new, these are distinct species. They no longer interbreed, and that would be an example of allopatric. I had a chance to go to the Grand Canyon with my family once upon a time, and I took some pictures. So here are my pictures, and certainly we didn't see any coyotes or bears. I mean, there's no bears down there. We didn't see any other big land animals. What we saw squirrels. Here's a close-up. So we saw lots of squirrels. So these squirrels are a classic representation of allopatric speciation, especially when you look at the different faces of the Grand Canyon. Butterflies. So butterflies, they might be in one particular forest, and then they're susceptible to wind. So wind might come along and blow a group of butterflies over to another area, and they become separated for a period of time. And in their little area, they develop particular traits or certain genes that become more prevalent. And then given enough time, hundreds of years, thousands of years, if you were to bring those butterfly populations back together, they would no longer interbreed. That's another example of allopatric speciation. Okay? So I encourage you to go through the link and look at the simulation. If you guys did the lizard lab from the first lesson from last week, you'll notice that there is an excellent section, module 4, that's perfect. It ties into this whole allopatric speciation, how the frills and the dewlaps cause these lizards to become very specialized and no longer interbreed with certain populations. It's perfect. Hopefully you'll do that. At the minimum, look at this particular video. You'll learn lots. Okay. So I'm not going to play this video. You don't need to see that. Let's move on. Diane Dodd is a scientist who was trying to demonstrate that this speciation event doesn't need hundreds of thousands or millions of years. It can happen within a very short period of time. So for those of you who have lots of fruit and you happen to leave it out for a period of time in the summertime, suddenly you have all these fruit flies. Fruit flies reproduce very quickly. So what she did, she took a population of fruit flies and she put some of them in a tank with this maltose sugar, and she put some of them in a tank with this starchy food. And she let several generations happen and occur, and the ones that ate the maltose and the ones that ate the starch, when they were intermixed later on, they showed a propensity for the flies that were in their original tank. So if you were a maltose fly, the maltose flies seemed to prefer each other. If you were a starch fly, the starch flies seemed to prefer each other. And she was able to demonstrate this in the lab in a very short period of time. So we can see that evolution doesn't need hundreds of thousands or millions of years to occur. One of the aspects that we will see in evolution, if you were to step back, is something called adaptive radiation. And adaptive radiation is where you typically have a founder species. It might be one of Darwin's finches or a honey creeper or something, and it gets blown over or flies over to an island or a brand new niche where there's hardly any other organisms there that would compete with it. And because it has freedom to eat anything, insects, honey, beaten nuts, the original founder species might then radiate into all these different niches. And so that term is known as adaptive radiation. And you'll see information about it on this particular slide, and you'll see a few other pictures as well. You had an opportunity to work through adaptive radiation through the Nearpod exercise you did last week. So if you completed the Nearpod interactive clicker thing, then you would have had an opportunity to see adaptive radiation already. So now I'm giving it a word so that you know what it is. But you've already done an activity related to this. Okay. The bird beaks that were getting larger or smaller to allow the finches to eat the difficult seeds versus the normal seeds, that was all examples of evolution occurring in a relatively short period of time. Okay. Bird songs, bird beaks. Now the other type of speciation event, if we're not talking about allopatric, is sympatric. For those of you who know anything about fish, you ever see the fish, you go to the aquarium, you go to the pet store, you know that there are many, many species. Some fish have similar names. So you see a goldfish, there's many different types of goldfish. Cichlids are a common and popular fish for aquarium enthusiasts. And these cichlids all come from a single lake. And in the single lake, there's hundreds of different, scores of different, dozens of, I'm not sure what the number is, but there's many different cichlid species. And they're all in the same lake. Some of them are near the top, some of them are near the middle, some are near the bottom, some are near the shore, some are in the benthic region. They're all different spots of the lake. So they were able to speciate into brand new species, but without the separation that you'd see that I talked about with the allopatric. So how might this occur? Well, One. A classic example would be the apple maggot fly. And you'll see this on the worksheet. So here we have apple trees, and these apple trees all grow in so I live in apple country, I live in farm country here. So these apple trees here. Here's my attempt at drawing. I'll use green for my trees. So here's one species of apple tree. And let's say here's another species of apple tree. So one might be Royal Gala, one might be Fuji, one might be Golden Delicious. On each of these apple trees, you might get a fly. And so the flies are going to land on the apples. So the flies are going to land on the apple here. So a fly might land on the apple here. And a fly might land on the apple here. And a fly might land on the apple here. Okay, so these flies. And what might happen, so all these trees are growing in the same area, but this fly, like I showed you with the Diane Dodds fruit flies, might really like the Gala trees. And Gala. Can't spell. And this one might really like the Fuji. And this one here might really like the Golden Delicious. All right. So this fruit fly, this apple maggot fly, if you give it enough time, this fruit fly might develop a particular appetite for Gala, and this might for Fuji, and this might for Golden Delicious. And given enough time, they might develop into a brand new species. They're all in the same area, right? The area itself has not changed. It's still the same area. So they're all in this big same area. So it's not allopatric, it's sympatric, because within this singular range, we end up getting development of smaller pockets. And so this is known as sympatric speciation. Okay? And the apple maggot fly is a classic example. Okay, sympatric speciation. Okay. So I've given you a few slides that compare the allopatric versus the sympatric. There are other ones as well. If you guys do some research, you'll see some other language. I only care about the allopatric and the sympatric. And when you go through the worksheet, you'll get a chance to practice those as well. Right? So the worksheet focuses on allopatric and sympatric. Selection pressures. So if an organism is going to develop, that development is typically pressured by the environment. And the environment can pressure the population to move in a particular direction. And those pressures from the environment are called selection pressures. There are 4 major selection pressures I want you to know: directional, stabilizing, disruptive, and sexual selection. Sexual selection we've actually talked about already, so that one's nothing new. The other 3 are going to be brand new. Okay. So our selection pressures: directional. When you take a look at a population is going to be typically representative of a spectrum. So if I look at the height of individuals in our classroom, what I find is probably most of the boys are probably between 5'7", let's say, and 6 feet, right? That's the majority of the population. So let me do a graph here. And there'll be fewer boys who are less than 5'7", and fewer boys that are greater than 6 feet. So I do a graph to represent this, then my graph would look something like this, with the majority of my population in the middle and very few at the extremes. So there's less here and there's less here, with the majority of the population being between 5'7" and 6 feet. The same graph could be speed. I might have the majority of the population that could run at 12 kilometers an hour to 13 kilometers an hour. There'd be fewer that would run much slower and fewer that would run much quicker. It could be the color of your skin. It could be the ability of your muscles to twitch. So whenever you look at anything that is a variable trait, we typically see a spectrum. And so this normal curve represents the spectrum, with the majority being here. All right. So when I look at my selection pressures are pressuring the entire population. On one side of the normal curve, we have an extreme. On the other side, we have an extreme, and in the middle, we have the normal. So with directional selection, what's going to happen is one particular extreme is selected for. So it could be the pepper moth, where a particular dark moth is selected for, or a white moth is selected for, but the medium gray, the gray sticks out on both the white and the dark. So it's either going to be white or dark, but not middle. And that's known as directional selection. Stabilizing selection is kind of anti-evolution. So in this case, neither the extremes are selected for, but the normal is selected for. So if you're on extreme, so with baby weight, typically if the baby's too heavy or too light, it's not likely to survive, or as likely to survive. If you're within the normal weight size of a baby, then you're more likely to survive. And so that typically stays away from evolution. Things don't typically evolve when you have stabilizing selection. You typically stay the same. And finally, disruptive. So this is the one that leads to brand new species. Directional leads to something. Stabilizing is no evolution, and disruptive is where both extremes are selected for. So we have our normal population, and then in this example, we have a banded snail. A banded snail. So with a banded snail, bands allow animals to camouflage and disappear in the grass. Dark allows them to be in the forest floor and disappear. If you're both, you'll stick out in the grass and stick out in the forest. So a banded dark snail isn't really successful. So in disruptive selection, both extremes are selected for, and eventually that might lead to two brand new populations. Right? So if we look at this chart here, here's our original normal curve of lemurs, and if it's dark color that's selected for, that would be directional. If it's light color that's selected for, that would be directional. If it is the medium color that's selected for, that would be stabilizing, so you wouldn't really see evolution, and the extremes would be gone. And if it is the medium that is actually not very successful, because there's a dark area of the woods that the dark ones are successful in, and a light area of the not woods that the light ones are successful in, then you might lose the medium and end up with two brand new populations for disruptive. Right? So now when you associate these words, directional selection is microevolution, right? A change in allele frequencies. Disruptive selection is macroevolution or speciation. Okay? And stabilizing selection is not evolution at all in this respect. And sexual selection is, we've talked about already. I'm just relating on the sheet so you have a place to put it all together.